Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast, A Journey Through Nature and Science. I'm your host, Don Murphy. Joining us on this episode is Dr. J. Craig Wheeler. Craig is a renowned astrophysicist and professor of astronomy at the University of Texas. Unlike futurists, he applies the rigors of physics to the question of how technology affects humanity, making him a unique voice and thoughtful counterpoint. He was one of the original signatories on the infamous letter calling for a temporary pause of work on AI in March of 2023. He's the author of the new book, The Path to Singularity: How Technology Will Challenge the Future of Humanity, with the foreword written by Neil deGrasse Tyson. So, Craig, welcome to the program. It's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, Don. Looking forward to the conversation.
So I want to get right into a question that I'm curious about. What prompted you to sign a letter calling for a pause of work on AI?
Yeah, that was somewhat controversial. I guess I was on a mailing list from the MIT group that thinks about these things. So here comes this email, and I had reservations at some level, but I thought, let's amplify the conversation, which is really what a lot of my motivation is for writing the book and responding to that. And so I did. I said, yeah, I signed the letter just to add to the context. I've got friends who deliberately didn't for various reasons. And there were people who said, well, if we sign the letter, it'll let China get ahead of the US. And there were all sorts of things there. But so my contribution aside, I think it did tend to further the conversation and make people think a little more deeply about it. So I don't have any reservations for having signed that letter, but I wasn't adamant about it either.
Right, understand. Well, let's get into some of the questions people have about AI, kind of from a scientific point of view in a deeper sense. So machine learning kind of informs AI or is kind of an underpinning or foundation of artificial intelligence. Simple questions. How do machines learn? What in the world does it mean for a machine to learn anything?
Yeah, so I think the machine learning is a way of categorizing data, and particularly when you have a huge amount of it and a human being can't really sort through it efficiently, then there are machine learning programs. The one and I haven't done this personally. I had a postdoc who was good at this and
Mhm.
taught me a little bit, uh, that you can arrange the data in clusters of related information. And so out of this bewildering array of data, billions of data points or something, you can find all of these things are in one area of parameter space and other things are in other areas of parameter space. And those different areas just kind of leap out at you. So the example that I was particularly struck with when I first saw it, again, this work of my postdoc, Ben Thomas, at the time, was analyzing data of spectra, the rainbow pattern given out by the atoms in an object, of all sorts of galaxies and stars. We had a large collection of data obtained here at the University of Texas at Austin, McDonald Observatory, and all of a sudden, all the white dwarfs were off in one place, and spiral galaxies were somewhere else, and active galactic nuclei like quasars were somewhere else. And if you just looked at this data, looked at the picture on the sky, you couldn't sort it out that easily. But
I
you
see.
have these parameters, and this thing is close to this, and this one is farther from that. It just sort of falls out at you. Then there's a lot more thinking and work that has to be done to utilize that. But that's basically what's going on with ChatGPT and these large language models
Mhm.
is they're looking through all of the words on the web and finding out which ones tend to fall into clusters more nearly related. This is my simple interpretation of it. And then that will tell you, okay, having used these four words in a sentence, the word that's most apt to be associated with it in this
Mhm.
clustering sort of way in my mind is
Right.
this word, and then
Right.
this word. started in this word, and then it gets very elaborate, and you end up with a chat thing that you can have a conversation with that feels almost like talking to a human being.
Yes, I had that experience recently talking to one of the chat bots before we started this conversation today. So in a way, these machines are recognizing patterns, and my understanding is that scientists use algorithms to train these machines how to recognize these patterns or these associations among things out of this, you know, trillions of terabytes of data. I hope I'm not overstating that, but it's
Well, I think
some
that's pretty much right.
incomprehensible, I'll put it as incomprehensible uh, amount of data that these machines can actually sort through, which is in itself is an amazing feat, and it's incredible. And I think it just blows people's minds to think that that much data. And so in a way, it's because of all the data that AI has made the leaps that it has recently. It's because now we have access and the computing power to sort through this tremendous amount of data. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I just want to emphasize again, this is not my area of expertise exactly,
Right.
but there's a lot of hard work by a lot of really brilliant people of figuring out how to do all that with the machine learning and the cluster analysis and all that kind of stuff. Very sophisticated mathematics. It's very high level, rigorous stuff that have brought us to this point, and then contemplating what the implications of that might be.
Mm. Understand. So, as a person that's, you know, spent most of his career looking at the sky, and which can be just a fascinating undertaking because it's, I think, born of childlike curiosity. Why did you suddenly become interested at this point in your life in AI? What was it about artificial intelligence that made you say, "Hey, I better pay attention to this, and not only pay attention, but write a book and tell people about what I think is going on?"
Well, it wasn't actually focused on AI to begin with. I had worked a bit in astrobiology, questions of the origin of life and how nature interacts with life. I worked traditionally on supernova explosions. And the question that I got into with a colleague here at the University of Texas was if a supernova went off relatively nearby the Earth, maybe light years away or tens of light years away, what would the impact be of life on Earth? And so it was that aspect of astrobiology was an extension of my traditional research on supernovae. And so I'd worked in that. I was on a major national committee that thought about such things, and it was just fascinating to watch people from chemistry and geology and biology and astronomy get together and talk about these topics. And then I had a chance to discuss sort of those kinds of things, sort of astrobiological things and evolution with some students in a program where you get together with a small group of them the day before classes start at the university, just as a way of getting the students introduced to the university. 50,000 students, however many we have
Right.
here. And,
Right.
and the students were aware that humanity was getting very close to the situation, having understood DNA and its implications of engineering our own evolution. And
Mhm.
that really wasn't so much on my mind at the time. But once the students pointed it out to me, I
Mhm.
found that really fascinating. And I thought, well, maybe one could make a course out of this. So I developed a course called The Future of Humanity. It was sort of motivated by that astrobiological conception, but then that led me in thinking about this and talking about things with the students in a more formal class to what was going on with artificial intelligence. So I didn't start by saying, I want to write a book on artificial intelligence. It was a much more indirect thing than that. It does immediately become a very large aspect of the topic because of where we're going and what we might do with it. But the book combines both genetics and AI and robots and brain-computer interfaces and all of the things that are involved in this. And I try to make the point that you can't really just single out any one of those. AI, for instance, they're all entangled and they're all going to be affecting us over the next few decades or a millennia, million years, long time
Right.
scale. And
Right.
for
Well, you point out in your book and in other discussions that we've had prior to this that to some extent artificial intelligence can have now a disruptive potential without the almost sci-fi predictions of AI becoming conscious itself. And so, what are some of these what is this disruptive potential that you see out there with artificial intelligence?
well, one of the first things people talk about, and I haven't brought a whole lot new to this, but it's just got to be part of the subject is jobs. If
Hmm.
AI is going to start displacing people, and you think of kind of low-level jobs to start with, and I think that is where it's going to happen, paralegals and things like that. But I've read an article relatively recently that CEOs of large companies should worry about this because what does a CEO do? He gets up in the corner office, puts his feet on his desk, and tries to think big thoughts about where
Right,
the company ought to be going.
right.
And you can make a case that a good AI sampling everything known on the internet could do the same thing. So
Mhm.
it's not necessarily the people at the bottom of the list. On the other hand, just in the last couple of days in the New York Times, there was an article about a guy who, what was it? He was in construction work and kept getting laid off. You know, you do one little project, you get laid off, and you've got to find another one. And he'd read about getting trained in computer programming, code writing. And
Mhm.
so he signed up for a code writing college class and did that for a year or so. And by the time he got through, he found out that AI was writing code and
Right.
that people would not hire him, although he'd put this effort into it because things had changed in the meantime. So just a very explicit displacement of people, this one particular guy being written about by AI. When he's even trying to get into the game of,
Mhm.
somehow writing AI or whatever computer code people want him to do. So that's one thing. But I've also, as I thought about it, in the course that I first taught, I used Ray Kurzweil's "The Singularity is Near," a very famous book that he wrote in 2005, talking about the transition to super intelligent machines and whatnot, making a prediction, which he still holds by, of roughly 2040. I don't know whether that's right or not. He's got
Mhm.
credible reasons for talking about that. But it occurred to me in going through that book and teaching this more formal class that Kurzweil didn't talk about implications for business in general, economics in general, the nature of our democracy. And so one of the things I wanted to do in the classes, we talked about it, and then in the book was to talk about those broader implications
Mhm.
that, that AI can learn your thinking just by the
Mhm.
way you interact with the web, and
Mhm.
it could, in principle, vote for you.
Mhm.
Now, that
Mhm.
would be an upset of our notions of liberal democracy, wouldn't it?
Well,
And
it certainly would, and I found that to some extent as I was preparing for this and engaging with these chatbots that they certainly do now respond to what you say, how you say it, and how you construct a sentence, the innuendos. These bots that I was talking to recently even do puns themselves based on our conversation and the context. I was
really,
really surprised that chatbot was, said something relative to intelligence, and then in parenthesis it had pun intended. Um,
interesting. No, I've not heard about AIs doing puns. I'm not
yeah.
shocked, but I hadn't heard that before, Don. That's very interesting
No,
because that
it
is a nuance of the use of the language, and it
right.
just shows
Well,
you they're getting sophisticated.
you mentioned something, and I don't want to leave this part of the conversation without focusing on you. You use the word singularity, which is used in a number of different contexts, from the Big Bang to AI becoming conscious. And when you're talking about singularities, what do you mean, or what does singularity connotate in the context of AI?
Yeah, I do try to tease that out in the path to singularity. The basic definition of singularity is a mathematical one. It amounts to dividing by zero so that the answer is infinity. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's what a mathematical singularity is. If you use general relativity to try to understand the centers of black holes or the origin of the Big Bang, as you just mentioned, general relativity predicts that you get an infinite density and that
Hmm.
space and time come to a halt. So
Hmm.
that's a physical definition in those particular contexts. In this case, the word is used metaphorically. It goes back to an essay by the engineer and science fiction writer Werner Vinge, who
Hmm.
used it in that metaphorical context of the transition to when machines can do anything a human can do and more and faster, which is the phase we're talking about. And Kurzweil picked that up in his 2005 book and in the book that just came out a couple of months ago. And so in my book, I talk about the math and the black hole thing to set the difference, but then it's used again metaphorically to represent the time when computers become more competent than humans.
No, I think that's very good, and I appreciate that explanation. I think our listeners will as well. Let's go back to something that you mentioned earlier that's central to your theme in your book and what you're concerned with, and that has to do with human evolution and the ethics that's involved in altering our own evolution, designing robots and AI human collaborations and interfaces. How do you see our human evolution being affected by AI?
Drastically.
Mhm.
We can't we have now the capability of designing children. And there
Mhm.
was a famous case a couple of years ago now in China where a guy warned not to do it went ahead and engineered a couple of twin babies, and they survived and seemed to be doing fine. He was trying to protect them from HIV.
Yeah, you're
Uh,
talking about the CRISPR baby controversy that
yeah,
occurred in China.
it,
He's
it,
out of
it,
prison. He went to prison for that for 3 years. He's out now, but doing the same thing.
well, stubborn guy, I suppose. A smart guy to pull it off. But yeah, he was reviled for that and in prison. But that that cat's kind of out of the bag. That now, yes, it's being put off. There's a huge ethical issues associated with it, but it has been established that that technology works, and that we could choose the properties of our own children. First, you start off trying to fix things, uh, diseases you might have or something. But the temptation to say, I want my kids to be bigger, smarter, faster than anybody else, or at least as fast as they can be. And yes, I would like to do this. It just seems to be very hard to keep that genie in the bottle going forward. Now, whether it comes out in a few years or decades or 100 years from now, I don't know. But I think we will end up engineering our own evolution.
And you
That's my
see AI
personal
as
opinion.
being
I
able to,
just
and you see AI as being able to facilitate that. Is that your point?
Um, well, no, my point is that I mean, so yeah, yes and no. My basic point is that given the technology just out of the biology and the genetics and CRISPR and things like that,
Mhm.
there's going to be a pressure to use that. And then does AI come into that? The answer was in practice, yes, because the AI can help uh, understand things like protein folding and help to understand the medical genetic things better. So yeah, I think they will be coupled again, a lesson of the book, but it's not like I'm saying I'm exploring AI. What does this have to do with genetics? Bringing the genetics up as its own independent field, and then there's going to be overlap.
I
So that's,
see.
I think the genetics comes first. The discovery of the double helix of the DNA came long before these advances in AI. But now they're both marching ahead with their own momentum as people seek to advance the science or make profit out of it or whatever.
Right. Well,
There's,
let's delve a little bit deeper into this, and I want to clarify a couple of things for our listeners because the purpose of this is science literacy, and I think we've mentioned a couple of things that some of my listeners may wonder, what is he talking about?
I hope so.
So anyway, we mentioned CRISPR, and CRISPR is a gene editing tool, and the acronym is CRSPR. And I won't go into the details of what that means because it won't mean anything to anybody. Um, but CRISPR is a gene editing tool, and for our listeners, when we're done with this, you can certainly go to my website at natureandsciencepodcast.com where we have a whole explanation of all of these things. But CRISPR is a gene editing tool, and as far as the CRISPR babies that we were talking about, what happened in that context and how it relates to evolution has to do with the fact that the embryos before these babies were born were gene edited so that their genes were modified so that in effect when they were born they had a genetic profile that they could then of course pass on to future generations. It's a
Yes, it
type
was
of
inheritable. Yes, it was
it was
inheritable. Absolutely.
inheritable. So it's so in a way that's a type of evolution because of course evolution involves mutations, natural selection of certain genes that give us a certain amount of fitness. In this case, the CRISPR gene editing gave a certain amount of fitness to these newborns that they would not otherwise have had, and which, if done by evolution, may have taken 40 million years or,
Exactly so. And
or
so now
something
it's
like.
being consciously engineered by humans.
Right. And
Yeah.
what AI can have to do with this is that many of the decisions that have to be made along the way, and they are multiple. I'm describing this as if it was willy-nilly and it happened very easily by this scientist in China, but the guy's brilliant and you needed help. And I am quite certain that there was some place along the chain of his decision making where he used artificial intelligence to help make certain decisions in his laboratory.
Yeah.
So AI facilitates these types of things happening as well,
Yeah. I
which
don't
is
know that for a fact, but I think it's very plausible that he could have used, whatever tools were at his disposal. Sure.
yeah. Well, I did some looking into that background, and I'm quite certain he used AI in some of
Okay.
his decision making processes. So do you think I mean, in that respect, do you think human beings as we are today will be around a million years from now or even 10,000 years from now? What are we going to look like if evolution is going to be impacted?
Yeah, I don't know what we're going to look like. I am very convinced in my own mind, sort of thinking on the time scale that astronomers do, that Homo sapiens, as we know them now, you and I, are not going to be around.
Hmm.
That there were no Homo sapiens on this planet 500,000 years ago.
Hmm.
So if you go back a million years ago, there were definitely no human beings like us on the planet. And so we have evolved out of that by natural selection and all these processes. So I'm confident that a million years from now, there won't be any Homo sapiens on this planet. On that time scale, Darwin and natural selection are apt to act and know that there won't be any Homo sapiens. But I think it could be much faster than that because, as we've just been discussing, we now have the technology that we can consciously affect our own evolution. And I don't know whether you find this me being dystopian or uh, cynical. I'm not sure quite what it is, but my perspective of the human condition and how we're driven is that if we've got this tool, we're going to use it.
Hmm.
Not each of us individually, but collectively as a society, we are going to evolve to a point where we will affect our own evolution. So that could happen quite rapidly in principle, 100 years, maybe,
Right.
I don't know, 10,000 years. Um, the other aspect is that we may evolve off this planet and into space, and the conditions in space are quite a bit different. And I think we already know that astronauts have genetic changes for being up on the space station for a long time. And we're a long way from collecting that together and consciously engineering that to do something. To my point there, just that space is a different environment, and people, individuals will adapt to live in that environment. And when they do, they're not going to be the same species as Homo sapiens anymore, given enough time and enough evolutionary pressure just from going off planet. But I think it's us doing it to ourselves is the thing that's probably going to be the dominant effect.
Yeah, isn't that
Because
always the case? We do so much to ourselves. So another aspect of this that is often brought up in the context of artificial intelligence is brain-computer interfaces. I know Elon Musk has talked about it. Some people in a science fiction context have talked about it enabling mental telepathy if you can get to the point where you can do these kind of brain-computer interfaces. What's your view on the likelihood that there will be these kind of brain-computer interfaces, and do they already exist?
yeah, they certainly already exist in a rudimentary form. And my feeling is that it will get more enhanced and more sophisticated. And it's apt to be one of the major things coming down the pike technologically. There's a fair amount of people thinking about and writing about brain-computer interfaces like this, but compared to the whole genetics thing and the whole AI thing, I think this is woefully under-discussed
Mm,
and thought about what the implications of this are. And I'm uncomfortable with them. I value my privacy, and the idea that you could hook up one human brain to another one, and effectively, if it worked efficiently, that would effectively be mental telepathy. Right now, you can use your brain to control prostheses. That's
mhm,
effectively telekinesis, moving things with your brain. And
mhm,
just to make sure I get the point out, this is absolutely connected to AI because you have to use AI to analyze the neural signals in your brain to know what to do with them. And so AI is absolutely intrinsic to this. The brain computer interfaces are not separate from AI. It's very much bundled. But still, if the implication is that you can control things with your brain, or you could read somebody's brain with this AI interpreter, and you can implant things into somebody's brain because you understand what the neural signals are. So you trigger those particular neural signals. That latter is certainly the least technologically developed so far. So
mhm.
you could read brains with some degree of success. It's going to get better. It needs to get better. Writing is harder, but there's been a little rudimentary work done in that. And now you couple them, and you definitely have mental telepathy. And then you have to think, well, I mean, some people say, well, this would be great. I could just think and talk to anybody on the planet. And I'm thinking, A, I don't want to talk to everybody on the planet. And I don't necessarily want to know what's going on in somebody else's mind. And I don't want them to know what's going on in my mind necessarily.
Right.
And then how do you control it? Suppose it's not Facebook or Google or something in control, but some new big company that's developed this technology, and they're the ones reading your brains and catalyzing the brain computer interface, and they own all your brain data now because they're the big company that they are. And I just think there's just lots and lots of implications of this over
Right.
longish periods of time that are severely under discussed and under thought about. They're
Well,
down.
this is not hyperbole. I want our listeners to know. In fact, to prepare for these podcasts, and because of what I do, I don't sleep. I constantly read. And
Mm,
so I just read yesterday that there is this, I guess the best way to describe it is a bioelectric gel that you can put on your forehead now. And this bioelectric gel can actually pick up the electric signals from your brain, just like an electroencephalographic
right.
device does, but it's with this gel, and then it can be read through Wi-Fi. The signals can be picked up, then communicated to a receiver through some sort of Wi-Fi connection, and that was a major breakthrough for this company. I'm going to post it on our website and under your page for this podcast interview,
Oh,
so
excellent.
people can
I'll look
look
for,
at it.
I collect tidbits like this, Don, and I had not heard that one. So I'll follow up on that one.
Yeah, that's kind of more interesting. There are a lot of them out there. You'd be, well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but there are a lot of things going on in government labs and in non-government laboratories secretly that are in this vein, that are closer to reality sometimes than I think that we're willing to admit. Um, so, what can citizens themselves do to, influence the development of this technology? I mean, people have expressed their concerns. You write a book, scientists write letters and sign them. We put pressure on our Congress members, but are there things that individual citizens can do to influence the development or non-development, slow it, moderate it, regulate it, that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, we do need to be thinking about that. So I guess I advocate two kind of simple steps. One is just being aware of all these changes. This thing you just read about, the brain-computer interfaces. I think more people ought to just open up their minds and pay attention to these. And there tends to be a human psychological thing. You go about your daily business and you're, overwhelmed with cares and busyness and work and all of that. And then something pops up. Somebody said, "Well, have you seen a Pontiac recently?" And you say, "No, I haven't seen a Pontiac recently." And then you look, "Oh, yeah, well, there's one." And oh, yeah, there's one. And maybe is Pontiac gone? Maybe I should say Buick. And then all of a sudden you start noticing things. So it's kind of a human character. Once you start to notice things, you notice them more. And I
Right.
think it's terribly important. One of the things I point I make in the book is to be aware of these things. And we can't all of us become experts in them, but we should take note when we see things of this technology marching ahead so very, very rapidly. So that's the first thing. Just be aware, pay attention. And then you can't do it directly, as far as I know. Well, maybe you can. Maybe you run for Congress yourself. But basically picking your representatives who will set up guardrails and set up regulations, and in the extreme case say, let's just not do that kind of research at all because it seems to be too dangerous. And and then vote for people who will support your point of view, and then keep those newly elected people keep their feet to the fire to make sure they do what you think is the right thing to do. So I think all of society's got to be involved in these decisions. They're big, huge, important ones, and somewhat technical. So it's a little hard. I mean, nobody's apt to be an expert in them, but or very few. But to use the democratic process. And then I write about how the AI could undermine the democratic process itself. So
Through its own lobbying,
these are
AI
very,
lobby.
yeah, very nuanced, very complicated issues that first you start off by being aware of them and thinking about them.
Exactly. So Let's go into a slightly different subject, but still very much related to AI. There's this huge concern, now, which we've already touched on, that AI is going to become conscious, and this fear that AI will surpass human intelligence, which we talked about in the context of a singularity. And so there's also this concept, which you and I have discussed before, of uh, artificial intelligence as an emergent property. And just to give us our
Mhm.
listeners a sense of what I'm talking about, the wetness of water is an emergent property. You wouldn't guess that you would take two gases like hydrogen and oxygen, put them together, and then get something like the wetness of water, emergent property.
Yep.
So with intelligence or artificial intelligence, we're talking about this technology that will somehow transition from what we recognize it to be today to something entirely different. And there have been science fiction books written about it. There was a TV program called Emergence that failed, but it was on for a season or two.
Mm.
And it talked about artificial intelligence as an emergent property. Do you think that's close at hand, or that singularity is around the corner here, that we will have the emergence of AI into something that we just don't even recognize or didn't even anticipate? I mean, we may anticipate it becoming smarter than us, but emergence embraces something that you may not even anticipate.
Yeah, interesting point. I, I think everything is kind of pushing in that direction, but nobody knows whether it's actually going to make it being a machine of some kind is going to make this transition to consciousness. Uh, this is a controversial thing. A lot of people have very different opinions about it. My predilection is to think of the brain as a very complicated biological machine in which consciousness has become an emergent property. That's simplifying a whole lot of things. I'm just saying, but that's my
Sure.
predilection how to think about these things. And
Mhm.
therefore, I do not find it all that difficult to imagine that happening rather than in a biological context to happen in a box full of silicon chips or something. If they're sufficiently complicated and sufficiently interconnected and all sorts of things, again, that's not proof. That's just a predilection to think that this is a
Mhm.
possible, if not plausible thing. There are people that think that human consciousness is a completely separate phenomenon outside of physics. And I don't happen to share that point of view, but I can't prove this one way or the other, and neither can they. It's just
Mhm.
part of the description. So I'm prone to thinking that yeah, we're moving in that direction. People are working in the AI game, are working very hard to try to develop uh, super intelligent computers.
I
The
understand.
danger then at that point being that uh, the computers, if they, for instance, can program themselves, and we already have computers that can strategize. Something I emphasize in the book that I don't hadn't felt quite was emphasized before in other conversations. And if you can strategize, you can, and this is like solving the game Go,
Mhm.
where
Right.
DeepMind, wrote this program that thought of strategies that no human had ever thought of before. But that's just qualitatively, that's a really sobering development, and it's already 5 years ago. But if you can strategize and you can write code, which you can, that
Mhm.
is the machine can, then in principle you can see the machine saying, well, I want to do X, but to do that, I've got to expand my code. But hey, I can do that. I can write my own code, and then I can develop in that way. And it will go basically at the speed of light, the speed at which electrons move around in silicon chips, rather
Mhm.
than the speed at which biology controls our brains. And so, if it happens, the chances of the machine intelligence racing away just faster than humans can comprehend is quite realistic, I think.
I
Whether
think
it will
so.
happen, that's still to be debated. But boy, if it happens, you can see the conditions that it's going to change a lot.
And we would need to be prepared for it. Something we talked about
Yeah,
earlier.
and that's the question. How do we prepare for it? That's
Yeah,
the
how do we prepare for it?
quintessential
Absolutely.
question. Yeah, sorry.
Well, we talked about something earlier, and it may or may not be that important, but I've been pondering it as I think about a lot of things, and that's the use of the term artificial itself. And I know you have commentary or thoughts about this because you've written about it in your book, but it seems to me, at least, that the term artificial um, is not correct in the description of what artificial intelligence is for a number of reasons. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I know you've thought about it, but it doesn't seem to me that there's anything artificial about what these machines do. They use data, they use existing technology, they use human input. Um, in my understanding of the term artificial, there doesn't seem to be anything artificial about artificial intelligence. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, I think it's a semantic issue that I hadn't quite thought about until you just raised it. Just meaning that it's in machines, not in biological brains and human crania. Um, but whether it is truly artificial in that sense is worth thinking about. Um, it it would it's in a machine, not in a brain, but it is drawn on human knowledge. It's been engineered by human brains. And so to argue that maybe artificial isn't quite the right word, I can see your point of view.
Mhm.
But I do, I guess, Don, I kind of think it's semantic rather than some deep issue. But
Mhm.
I'm open to conversation on the topic.
Well, when I think about it, just to put a little finer point on it, it's just it seems to me that when we're talking about intelligence, human beings are talking about intelligence in the context of human intelligence. And so even when a machine does something, we dub it to be intelligent. So to me, it seems that what we're doing is expanding, using technology to expand human intelligence. Or another way perhaps of saying it, aren't we just using technology to, as
Mhm.
we've done in the past, to expand human capabilities? And so what's the problem with that? That's what we've
Yeah, no,
always done.
fair enough. Yeah, it's a tool. It's a very sophisticated, special tool. But yeah, it goes back to picking up the first, rock and hammering something with it. It's the
Sure.
same process as well. So I take your point there. One of the other things. So this isn't directly to your point, but a perspective I have had on it is this intelligence that comes out of machines. If we postulate that that will happen, uh, I think will be a very alien intelligence in the
Mhm.
sense that how our brains have developed is over hundreds of thousands, millions of years of biological evolution. And, being hunter gatherers on the veldt in Africa, where we all came from, led to the way our brains work and how we think about things and how they're segmented and the lizard brain and the conscious brain and all that kind of stuff. So here come these machine intelligences, if we postulate that they're true. Uh, they're not going to have all that evolutionary background. They're going to wake up inside a silicon box in somebody's data center and then look around and register the world and interact with humans. But they're on a completely different evolutionary track, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So
Mhm.
how much they share human perspectives or whether they're completely alien perspectives, I don't know. I think that's people talk about trying to engineer sympathetic AI at some level so that
Sure. Mhm.
uh, that it as it develops, it's consonant with human sensibilities. And that's one of the questions. Can we actually control that or not? It's one of the things we must define and decide where to put in guardrails and regulations and all this kind of stuff. If
Well,
we can.
just if we can, yeah. Well, to circle back to this concept of emergence, and I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but I think what you're saying is that, yeah, it will be a different type of evolution, and to top that off, if we look and understand what emergent properties really are, and something emerges out of this technology that we had no way of anticipating this would happen.
Mm.
We may have some inklings because we are pretty sophisticated creatures and intelligent. So I think we have some inklings of what might happen, but what might happen and what will happen are really two different things, and it's what will happen that we have the limited knowledge about, and may even have limited capacity to cope with. The way some science fiction writers have put this notion forward is, of course, that the machines advance beyond human capabilities to control them, and machines are able to do things that humans can't even conceive of. And think, if you think of a chess game, think so far ahead that there's no way that we can even reason. So this brings into the fold the concept of reason. We talk about intelligence and reasoning and that sort of thing. So the capacity to reason and the capacity simply to perform intelligent processes can be really two different things. So if you get to a situation where you have artificial intelligence that reasons in a way that is not only different, but that is spectacularly faster, then I think you're right. There are things that we need to be thinking seriously about how we would respond to, and doing some modeling. I guess scientists, you're a scientist, we can do all sorts of modeling and come up with ideas. Is this something you've been working on with respect to your book and your thinking on this? Have you thought of modeling some of these things that might happen in the future?
I've not. I hope and trust there are people out there, particularly people who are designing AI and advancing AI and deep into the engineering mathematical details of that. I hope they're thinking about it. Uh,
Right.
yeah, as much as I could bring my energies to it, writing this book and then trying to foster the ideas there and related ideas is about as far as my energy has carried me at this point.
Right. Well, let's, you know, sort of relate this to what your career has been all about as we wrap this up. So, artificial intelligence is capable of facilitating a lot of things that we haven't been able to do in the past. In your discipline, looking at supernovae and things of that nature, how do you see, or what do you see the future being in? I know you're not a cosmologist, but as a astro scientist or an astrophysicist, what do you see AI impacting in the future, or enabling us to be able to do that we're either not able to do, or what do you think is out there yet to be discovered that AI may assist with?
Yeah, it's machine learning certainly is totally, and I mean, infecting isn't the right word because that sounds pejorative. Uh,
Mm.
been adopted by astronomers. We just started a new center. One of my colleagues, younger colleague here at the University of Texas, combining disciplines in astronomy and some other related areas to focus on doing machine learning and advancing the astronomy, identifying things in photographs, complex hydrodynamic interactions, and picking out what the important parts are. So all that's all over the place. The other already, and so I think the tendency to adopt AI is just part of that. Start out machine learning, and now it's more general AI, and that would just keep going in terms of analyzing data. You know,
Mhm.
one of the other anecdotes that I tell is I was starting to sort of think these kind of thoughts. This is probably almost 10 years ago. and went to a meeting of astronomers who were trying to think about what astronomy is going to be like a decade or two from now. And there got to be a discussion of new telescopes and the observing staff who would run those telescopes, people hired not to do the astronomy, but to make sure the machines were all working. And I said, well, I think if you look forward, you'll find out that you don't need that staff as much or at all because artificial intelligence can do the same job. Again, this was of order 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And that notion just absolutely fell like a lead balloon. Nobody understood what I was talking about. And as I was writing this book, I came across a story that said the Japanese Subaru telescope is one of the major telescopes on the planet on Mauna Kea in Hawaii, was developing an AI assistant. And again, this was just like 2 years ago, and I just had to laugh out loud because
Right,
I had nailed it, and
right,
nobody will
absolutely.
remember that but me. And we don't have AI assistants here at McDonald Observatory yet, but it's going to happen.
Absolutely. Well, there's some deep questions, and maybe we'll wrap up with this one. It's kind of in your area, and one of the professors at my alma mater at UC San Diego worked on this.
Mm, mm.
They were trying to confirm or deny or falsify the concept of how the universe expanded, and it involved the looking at the polarization of early light.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so they were trying to devise a method to look at that. And unfortunately, they got a lot of interference. They thought they had it nailed and they had done it, and they got a lot of interference from dust, unfortunately. And as we've talked about before,
Yeah.
you can just do nothing but study dust in the universe. And
Yeah. No, dust is a very legitimate thing to study, actually, from a physics point of view.
exactly. Um, but it seems to me that what you're talking about is analyzing, processing a lot of data. And at the time this was done, artificial intelligence hadn't advanced even to the point that it is now. And it seems to me that there
Mm-hmm.
would be tools out there now that would maybe quite easily, or not without effort, and maybe not easily, but with some effort, be able to assist, as you were talking, be an AI assistant in assisting to determine whether or not you're looking at dust or not, or whether you're actually seeing the polarization of light that you want to see that would indicate certain things about how the universe expanded.
I don't know any details about that, but your hypothesis is very plausible that
Mhm.
people are writing code and adapting AI to help solve that problem. So
Yeah.
your colleagues at UC San Diego were not off the mark. They were doing the right thing, and again, the
Yes.
dust just happened to be more of a problem than they thought. But whoever solves that problem is going to have to beat down through that uh, information in the dust to get past that to see the polarization of the cosmic microwave background radiation. The problem's a very big, very concrete one, but
Right.
solvable. But solvable, and
Solvable. Yes.
probably with AI, with the
Right.
help of AI at least.
Right. So, what does the future hold for Craig? What are you going to be doing? What do you see yourself doing in the next 10 years,
Yeah,
um,
well,
AI assisted or not?
oh, geez, I've okay. Well, the fact is, one of the things I love to do is write, and I've
Mhm.
always sort of felt like a writer in my soul.
Mhm.
And as a professional astrophysicist, I was so busy doing, I mean, I wrote a lot, but they're grant proposals and papers and stuff. It's not quite the same thing. So picking this topic up and turning it into a book was, in fact, a labor of love. It's something
Mhm.
I wake up every morning looking forward to putting some words on a computer. It's just the way
Right.
my brain is hired. So I was delighted to do this book just because I enjoyed the process of writing it. And the last month or so, I've been completely swamped with publicizing it. Yours is like the eighth podcast I've done, Don, and one of the
Oh,
more
good.
pleasant ones. They've all been good, but I've really enjoyed my conversation with you. But I'm already working on another book. I've got several of them in mind that I will just charge through that I simply did not have the time to work on while I was still an active professional. So retiring is giving me the time to pursue my. Yeah, I mean it's a love at some level, but it's really a compulsion at some level as
Right.
well. I just like to write.
Right.
And so
Well, our tag,
that's it. I can do
that's,
this for another decade or more if I can hang on.
understand. Well, one of our taglines for this podcast is to something I stole from Einstein, or at least they say Einstein said it. Like they say he said a lot of things, but that's to never stop questioning and to continue to be curious. And I really applaud the efforts of scientists like yourself that have been curious, prodded by curiosity, and continue to question things. I mean, AI has not been your field, but because you're a curious human being, you're out there still questioning, and I think you're bringing us some important things for society to contemplate as this technological advance goes forward. So, thank you for your work, Craig. Thank you for your book,
Oh,
and thank you for joining me on this podcast.
absolutely. I very much enjoyed it, and you're very welcome.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of A Journey Through Nature and Science. Kira Deneen joins us on our next episode to talk about deoxyribonucleic acid. You know it as DNA. She'll talk about what it is, how it's used in genetic testing, and genetic counseling. Please leave a comment, or now you can text us directly to ask a question, leave a comment, or find out more about a particular episode. Please help us grow this podcast by hitting the like button and subscribing. As always, stay safe, share happiness, and remember, never stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing.